A week had passed. Life was getting worse by the hour. We hadn't crawled out of that hole since the last encounter. Nobody wanted to mess with those things in that God-forsaken darkness again. About a week ago, Andrew and I managed to pry open that heavy metal door I mentioned earlier. What we found behind it was the first bit of good luck we'd had in a long time. We couldn't open it all the way, just enough to squeeze through. I clicked my lighter, and the flame revealed a room frozen in time. Stale furniture, moldy walls, and a thick layer of dust. Then I saw them, a rack of rifles. 5 old Mausers were leaning against the wall. There were human remains on the floor, still wearing scraps of old military uniforms. On the tables, we found crates of ammo and some old detonators. Everything was rusted, but among the junk, we found a couple of rifles and some rounds that looked decent. We spent the next few days taking them apart and cleaning them. We managed to piece together 2 working rifles and about 15 rounds of ammo. A week in this bunker. I feel like my head is going to explode. The sound of dripping water is like a needle in my brain. Andrew and I look like cavemen, overgrown, dirty, and scratching ourselves raw. But that's nothing compared to the hunger. The food is gone, the water ran out 2 days ago. We've been catching drips from the ceiling just to keep our throats from cracking. My stomach is in knots, and the weakness is starting to take over. We were sitting against the wall, listening to our stomachs growl. "Andrew, we have to move," I said, "before we start looking at each other as a meal." "Go where? To the surface? We don't even know where we are, Jack." He was right. This bunker was a trap, but we had no choice. "Pack your things. We're going up. If we're going to die, I'd rather do it out there than in this hole." "I'm not planning on dying yet," Andrew smiled. "You're the old man. I'm just a kid." I liked his spirit, even though I could see the terror behind that smile. We climbed out into the absolute void. Since the oil for the lamp was gone, our eyes had somewhat adjusted to the dark. I could see the mangled silhouette of my Ford and the endless black ceiling where the sky used to be. It was dead silent. Not even a breeze. "Looks clear," I whispered. "Let's head back toward the main road. Maybe it leads somewhere." We walked for 40 minutes. Suddenly, flashes of light started hitting my eyes. I got excited for a second, then realized it was just my brain short-circuiting. I'd blink and see green trees and sunshine. Then I'd blink again, and it was back to the abyss. I heard heavy breathing behind me. I turned around and saw Andrew had ripped off his gas mask. He was walking along like he was on a Sunday stroll. I lunged at him and shoved the mask back onto his face. "Are you crazy?" I hissed. He blinked, looking dazed. "What? What happened?" "You took your mask off. It's the hallucinations. Don't let them win." We kept moving and saw them again. Creatures were darting through the trees around us. They moved like animals, erratic and fast. Then I heard a low growl from above. On a branch, right over our heads, a massive winged thing was perched. I couldn't see its body, but its eyes were glowing like dying embers in the dark. Andrew stood frozen. The thing started to climb down the trunk. The sound of dozens of footsteps surrounded us. "Run!" I yelled. We bolted. About 200 yards ahead, I saw the outline of a highway. We ran with everything we had, feeling the pack closing in behind us. Down the road, maybe half a mile away, I saw headlights. It was a bus. It wasn't moving. When we reached it and climbed inside, I stopped cold. The bus was full of corpses. It looked like an evacuation transport that never made it. Blood was everywhere. We slammed the door shut, and something heavy slammed into the roof. The winged creature had landed right above us. I realized right then. If we didn't fight, we were just going to be the next set of bodies on this bus. I leveled my rifle. Andrew did the same. I pulled the trigger. A dud. I racked the bolt and tried again. The pale things outside were getting closer, their white eyes reflecting the interior lights of the bus. Suddenly, Andrew's rifle roared. A horrific shriek erupted from the roof as the winged thing took off. Andrew kept firing like he was Rambo. The creatures outside scattered back into the woods. Silence fell again. We sat on the back seats, gasping for air. Then I heard a sound from the front of the bus. Someone was alive. An old man was coughing, trying to pull himself up from the floor. We ran to him. I turned off the headlights so we wouldn't attract more unwanted attention. The realization hit me hard. All those monsters out there. They used to be people. We grabbed a respirator from the dead driver and put it on the old man. "Who are you? Where were you going? Is there any water?" I asked. The old man just coughed, staring at us with hollow, terrified eyes. We needed to get him talking. He was our only link to what was left of the world. The situation was grim. The creatures had scattered, but they were still close. We had to be dead silent. One of them walked right up to the bus, sniffing and growling, but it couldn't see me in the absolute pitch black. It felt like they hunted more by sound and heat than sight. I managed to crawl to the back of the bus where the dead officers lay. My luck turned around. I found several handguns with spare magazines and tucked under a body a compact carbine. I also found a dosimeter. I didn't turn it on yet. I didn't want the beeping to bring the whole pack down on us. Andrew was trying to help the old man. The guy was coughing blood, and it was clear he didn't have much time left. "Jack, we need to move," Andrew whispered through his mask. "This guy won't last, and we need to know where this bus was heading." "I found gear," I whispered back. "Guns, ammo, and a dosimeter. I have a plan." I sat in the driver's seat. The controls were different from my Ford, but I could manage. "Ready?" I asked Andrew. He nodded, gripping the carbine. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the headlights on. Right in front of the bus stood about 10 of them. These were clearly human once. Some were still wearing jeans and jackets, but when the lights hit them, they went wild. One jumped onto the windshield. Up close, it was a nightmare. It had no eyes, no nose, no ears. Just a massive, gaping maw filled with rows of jagged teeth and black slime dripping from its jaws. I floored it. The bus lurched forward, crushing several creatures under the heavy wheels. Andrew started laying down cover fire, the flashes from the muzzle lighting up the chaos outside. "He's down!" Andrew yelled after a few shots. The thing on the windshield slid off and disappeared under the tires. We drove for 30 minutes until we saw the silhouette of a gas station. Andrew checked the dosimeter. The radiation levels are high, but manageable for a short stop. We need supplies. We pulled over. I grabbed a lighter and scouted the aisles. Most of the shelves were empty, but I found some chips, canned meat, and water. The old man finally woke up. He looked at us like we were demons. "Who are you?" he croaked. "Just people trying to survive." "Where was this bus going?" He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I'm a physicist. They were taking us to a secure facility, a train. They said there were accidents all over the world. But it wasn't an accident. The governments, they planned something, and it went wrong." The old man knew he was dying. "I don't want to suffer," he said, looking at the blood on his hands. "Tell me where the train is, then end it. Please." He told us about a railway hub in a city called Junction City. That's where the high-ranking officials and scientists were being gathered. Andrew didn't hesitate. He pulled his pistol and ended the old man's misery. Immediately, a shriek echoed from outside. The gunshot had acted like a dinner bell. "Jack, look." Andrew pointed at the window. The gas station was surrounded. Dozens of them were clawing at the glass. The dosimeter started screaming. The levels were spiking. "We need to break out, now!" I felt the panic rising. My vision blurred. Suddenly, I saw my son standing outside. Everything looked bright and warm for a second. "Jack, it's a hallucination, move!" Andrew grabbed my jacket and dragged me toward the bus. The thing I thought was my son was actually that winged nightmare, waiting for me to step into its reach. We scrambled back into the bus. Andrew did something crazy. He started throwing the bodies of the dead passengers out the door. The creatures swarmed the corpses, tearing into them. It gave us the opening we needed. I slammed the bus into gear and we tore away from the station. The dosimeter quieted down to a low, rhythmic click. "We're heading for Junction City," I said, gripping the wheel. "We're out of filters and almost out of ammo, Jack." "Then we better find that train. It's our only shot left." We drove into the endless night, two shadows in a dying world, heading toward a ghost of a hope. The road to Junction City felt like a journey through purgatory. The bus was rattling and every mile felt like a victory against the darkness. We were at our breaking point, both us and the bus. Andrew was quiet, staring out of the shattered window into the void. We finally reached the outskirts of the city. In the distance, through the thick radioactive fog, I saw it. The railway hub the old man had mentioned in Junction City. The headlights of the bus caught the glint of steel tracks. A massive locomotive was idling there, steam or smoke rising into the black sky. "We made it, Andrew," I said, my voice cracking from dehydration. He didn't answer. I pulled the bus to a stop, right near the platform. "Andrew, hey, wake up, we're here." I reached over to shake his shoulder and my heart stopped. He was cold. His respirator was still on, but his eyes were fixed on nothing. I checked for a pulse, but there was only silence. The radiation, the stress. It had finally taken him. The kid who had kept me sane was gone, just like everyone else. I couldn't even cry. I was too empty for tears. I left Andrew in the bus, giving him one last look before stepping out onto the platform. The dosimeter was ticking a slow, funeral rhythm. I walked toward the train. I expected soldiers, scientists, maybe a chance at a new life. But as I climbed into the first carriage, I saw the truth. It wasn't a rescue. The train was full of the same pale, eyeless creatures I'd fought on the road. They weren't attacking. They were just sitting there, waiting, like they were passengers on a trip to the end of time. The world started to spin. The blackness of the sky seemed to leak into my eyes. I fell to the floor of the train, the cold metal pressing against my cheek. I heard a voice. It sounded like Sarah. "Jack, Jack, can you hear me?" The darkness shattered like glass. I blinked, and the stinging smell of antiseptic hit my nose. Fluorescent lights blinded me. I wasn't in a bunker. I wasn't on a ghost train. I was in a hospital bed in a town called Clarion. Sarah was sitting next to me, her eyes red from crying. "Oh God, Jack, you're awake." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. The sky? The creatures? She grabbed my hand. "It was an accident, honey, a month ago, on the way back from the lake. A truck hit us. You've been in a coma." I looked around the clean, bright room. The sun was shining through the window. The kids were in the hallway, laughing. Everything was normal. The apocalypse, the copper taste of radiation, the winged monsters. It was all a dream. A long, horrific nightmare born from a fractured mind. But as I lay there listening to the machines beep, I felt something. I looked at the bedside table. There, among the flowers and cards, was a small, dirty scrap of a bag. And on my palm, there was a faint, fading mark. The kind you get from gripping a heavy iron pipe too hard. Sarah told me the doctor said I might have vivid dreams. But I remember Andrew. I remember his smile before it turned into terror. And sometimes when the room gets too quiet, I can still hear the rhythmic clicking of a dosimeter in the back of my head. The light is back for now, but I know how easily it can go out forever. Then a sharp, jarring snarl from the dosimeter ripped through my peaceful senses. I snapped my eyes open. Andrew was right there beside me. We were still on the bus. Nothing had changed. It was all just a dream, or another hallucination. Honestly, I thought things would be a little better in Junction City, but I was wrong. We left the bus behind, took everything useful, and headed into the streets. The city didn't look like a normal settlement anymore. About 80% of the buildings were covered in some kind of glowing slime. It emitted a faint, sickly light that helped us see just enough to move. The dosimeter was acting crazy, beeping like a maniac one second and going silent the next. In the distance, we could hear screams that made my skin crawl. Every step was a struggle. Andrew was in bad shape. He'd vomited blood about 20 minutes ago. My own insides were burning, and the weakness was overwhelming. I collapsed near the wall of a building, gasping for air. Andrew sat down beside me. "How you doing, brother?" I managed to ask. "I think we're near the end, Jack," he muttered. "Don't talk like that. We have to find that station. Do you think they'll even help us? We're walking corpses soaked in radiation." "Maybe," Andrew said, his voice fading, "but we have to try." We checked our ammo. 1 magazine for the pistol and a few rounds for the rifle. Not much, but better than nothing. The dosimeter started beeping louder. We had to move. As we crept forward, Andrew suddenly froze. He was hugging the wall, staring around the corner. I peeked out and felt the blood drain from my face. The walls were moving. Not the buildings themselves, but something on them. A massive creature, barely visible through the slime, was crawling above us. And below, smaller things were scurrying in the shadows. Suddenly, a loud shriek tore through the air. The creature sprinted toward us. "Freeze! Don't move!" Andrew yelled. I stood perfectly still, not even breathing. About 15 of them surrounded us, but they didn't attack. They were just there, moving right next to us. Up close, they were nightmare fuel, distorted humans with extra limbs, or no limbs at all, crawling like worms. Their eyes glowed with tiny, cold white dots. After a few tense minutes, they all took off in the opposite direction. Then, the massive thing on the wall moved past us. It looked like a giant spider made of hundreds of human bodies. Arms, legs, and heads fused together into a living, twitching mass. It left a trail of that glowing slime behind it. Once they were gone, we practically collapsed from the tension. "Why didn't they touch us?" I asked, trembling. "Maybe because we're already half dead, Jack. We probably smell like uranium." We kept moving, avoiding the puddles of slime. The city was a graveyard of abandoned cars and corpses. Suddenly, a chunk of that glowing slime fell from a roof, landing right on Andrew's shoulder. It started smoking immediately. The stuff was corrosive. Andrew screamed in agony as it burned through his suit and into his skin. "Shut up. You'll call them back," I hissed, trying to scrape the burning goo off him. The ground started to tremble. The spider mass was coming back. Lured by the noise, I grabbed Andrew and practically carried him. We ducked into a massive building, a fire station. I slammed the heavy metal door shut just as something slammed into the other side. Andrew fired his pistol through the door until he passed out from the pain and exhaustion. Inside the fire station, I found some newer gas masks, filters, and fireproof suits. I dragged Andrew into a fire truck and changed his mask. I managed to find a map in the glove box. Junction City was a maze, but the railway hub wasn't too far now. I scouted the second floor and found a flashlight. It was a small win, but I'll take it. Andrew is still unconscious. His pulse is weak, but he's breathing. I'm sitting here in the dark, looking at the map. Everything inside me is burning. I have to focus my eyes just to see the lines on the paper. This is it. The final push. We're either getting on that train at Junction City or we're dying in this fire truck. I'm going to close my eyes for just an hour, then we move. I didn't sleep for an hour. My body wouldn't let me. Every time I drifted off, I felt the fire truck shaking as if the heavy footsteps of those things outside were vibrating through the concrete floor. I checked on Andrew. I shook his shoulder, gently at first, then with desperation. Andrew, kid, wake up. It's time. The station is just a few blocks away. He didn't move. I pulled back the sleeve of his suit and my heart sank. The dark purple splotches had reached his neck. I leaned in, pressing my ear to his mask. There was no ragged breath, no heartbeat, just a hollow, terrifying silence. Andrew was gone. He had died quietly in his sleep, while I was staring at a map that led to nowhere. I sat there in the cabin of that fire truck for a long time. I was alone. Truly, finally alone. I didn't cry. My throat was too dry, my body too depleted. I just grabbed the flashlight, the map, and the carbine. I didn't look back at him. I couldn't. I stepped out of the fire station into the glowing fog of Junction City. The walk was a nightmare. My vision was tunneling, flickering between the dark ruins and flashes of a world that used to be. I saw shadows moving on the rooftops, but they didn't drop down. They were just watching the last human voice in the city fade away. Finally, I saw the silhouette of the railway hub. A massive, dark shape sat on the tracks. A faint light shimmered through the haze. The train, I rasped, coughing up something thick and metallic. I dragged my leaden legs over the gravel, crawling the last 50 yards to the platform. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the cold steel of the locomotive. I clicked on the flashlight for one last look. The light flickered, fighting the darkness for a second, and reality hit me like a physical blow. There was no rescue train. There was only a rusted, burnt-out shell of a freight car that had been derailed for decades. The light I saw was just the bioluminescent slime coating the twisted iron. The steam was just the radioactive fog drifting through the broken skeletal roof of the station. The old man's sanctuary was a myth, a beautiful lie that kept us walking until the end. I slumped against the rusted wheel. I pulled out my notebook, my fingers barely able to grip the pen. "My name is Jack," I wrote, the letters jagged and uneven. "I made it to the station. Andrew died in the fire truck. There is no train. Sarah, kids, I'm coming to see you now." I leaned my head back against the cold iron. The copper taste was overwhelming. I closed my eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I felt the warmth of a sun that had been dead for a month. The notebook slipped from my hand, falling into the gray ash. The silence was finally complete. If you like the story, please support the channel with a like and a subscription. See you soon.